There was a cold breeze blowing from the basement, providing a hint of relief for Klein's tense emotions. It's finally here. Once I pass this stage, I won't have to worry about being examined like this for at least half a year. Once I advance to Sequence 8 and become a so-called clown, I'll possess actual combat strength. With the aid of divination and my flaring sun charms for backup, I'll have a chance of surviving even more relatively dangerous situations. Since I was waiting for the Holy Cathedral's examination, I haven't even dared to withdraw the £300 that Miss Justice transferred to the anonymous account. Just in case they audit my financial situation and find out that I'm in possession of a large sum of money from an unknown source. Just as Klein's thoughts flashed through his mind uncontrollably, Dunn Smith smoothed his sleeve and said in a low voice, "The person in charge of the examination is one of the 9 high-ranking deacons of the Nighthawks, Crestet Sesamir. The Holy Cathedral attaches great importance to you." "A high-ranking deacon?" Klein blurted in surprise. In general terms, the 13 archbishops and 9 high-ranking deacons made up the upper echelons of the church. It was said that there was no lack of high-sequence beyonders among them. The 22 ladies and gentlemen were all equal in terms of their rankings. They only followed the orders of the Evernight goddess, and they were only answerable to the Pope. Dunn took a whiff of the cold wind from the basement before nodding faintly. "Yes, he's a high-ranking deacon. But you don't have to be nervous. Crestet is only a Sequence 5, and has yet to enter a demigod state. So you don't have to be too afraid or reverent. Oh, his title in the Beyonder world is the Goddess's Sword. As he possesses a holy item, his combat strength is similar to a newly advanced Sequence 4 Beyonder. I just chatted with him. He was very friendly. If I read between the lines, Captain is telling me that he only said what was necessary. He doesn't want me to be nervous and go according to the plan." Klein nodded thoughtfully and asked, "Where should I meet the high-ranking deacon?" "The alchemy room where we concoct potions," Dunn replied simply as a hint of gloominess flashed across his face. "The alchemy room where we concoct potions? The laboratory where old Neil made my seer potion?" Klein slowly let out a breath and returned to the Nighthawk's recreation room and took his outerwear from the clothes rack. He put on the black windbreaker, placed his hands into his pockets, and walked down the winding stairs that connected to the basement. Then he took a left turn at the cross junction. Very quickly, Klein saw a secret door under the light of the elegant gas lamps that lined the walls. He saw that the long tables in the room had been moved aside to open up a large space in the center of the room. There were 2 classic high-back chairs facing each other with less than a meter in between them. There was a man in his 30s wearing a black windbreaker and a white shirt seated on the chair that was facing the door. His golden-brown hair was cut very short, and his blackish-green eyes were as dark as a forest on a moonless night. The collars of his shirt and windbreaker were put up, and his entire chin was hidden within the shadows. "Hello, Your Grace." Klein bowed. Crestet Sesamir had his right leg crossed over his left as he leisurely leaned back into his chair. He smiled and replied, "Hello, Klein. You may sit over there." He pointed at the high-back chair opposite him. By the side of his leg was a suitcase made of silver. It was about the size of a violin case. It can carry a sword with an appropriate length. Klein walked forward and sat at his appointed seat. Crestet rested his right index finger on his upper lip as he thought for a few seconds. "I plan to first examine how well you've mastered your potion. That's not a problem, right?" "Not at all." Klein shook his head with utmost confidence. "Very confident." Crestet smiled but maintained his previous posture. All he did was intently watch Klein. Klein suddenly felt the light from the surrounding gas lamps vanish, as though they were swallowed by the rich darkness. He suddenly became exhausted, as though his biological clock had struck the time for sleep. But his mind was extremely tense, making it impossible to relax. It was just like when he was unable to sleep peacefully due to overexhaustion. The silent night filled his surroundings as Klein heard the noise of dripping water from a tap that wasn't closed properly. Then he heard the conversations in the Blackthorn Security Company and the movement of the wind blowing through the stairway. Besides that, he didn't see anything that he shouldn't see, nor did he hear any noises that he shouldn't be able to hear. Excellent. Crestet's hypnotic voice dispersed the darkness, and the light from the gas lamps inside and outside the alchemy room came into Klein's sight again. Klein suddenly shook off his exhaustion and returned to his previous energetic self. He affected me without me realizing it. Is that what a Sequence 5 Beyonder is capable of? This is the horror of a high-ranking deacon? He recalled what had happened and felt a little frightened. Crestet Casimir clasped his hands and put them on his knees. He bent down slightly and his lips were blocked by his collar. You passed the test. You achieved a level beyond outstanding in your mastery of your potion. I'll need to observe to see if there are any hidden dangers in your mind, to make sure that the potion's remaining spirit hasn't changed your character subconsciously or left some problems behind. You have 3 minutes to prepare. Klein immediately nodded and said, all right. He secretly took a breath and allowed himself to enter cogitation to remove various negative thoughts. Crestet didn't speak again. He took out a silver pocket watch from the inner pocket of his black windbreaker and flipped it open. Then he attentively watched the second hand move. 3 minutes later, Crestet closed his pocket watch and said with a smile, I'll begin singing. Singing? Klein wore a look of confusion. Before Klein could reply, Crestet started humming a lovely melody. The melody reverberated in the alchemy room and gradually lost its harmony and went out of tune. Squeak. Scratch. Zing. Klein heard the noise akin to the scratching of blackboards with nails, the sound of bubble wrap rubbing against each other, electric drills drilling, and various other annoying noises. The noises intensified and turned more and more chaotic. They made him want to vent his frustrations and cause destruction. But Klein, who frequently experienced the mad ravings and terrifying screams, restrained his urges very quickly. He displayed annoyance, tension, frustration, and insecurity at appropriate times. Being in too perfect of a state would end up being a problem. It was unknown when Crestet Casimir had stopped singing. The noises in the alchemy room disappeared and room was awash with tranquility and silence. Silence sure is great, Klein exclaimed in his head. Very good, excellent. There are no latent problems in your soul. Of course, if you wanted to beat me up or stuff my mouth with something, that's only normal. Crestet's mouth was blocked by his collar, so Klein could only determine his emotions through his tone. No, I wouldn't dare, Klein admitted honestly. Crestet smiled and said, Congratulations, you have passed all the tests. Now it's time for the question and answer session. His green eyes suddenly darkened. His gaze was deep as though he could see through flesh and looked directly at the spirit. Go ahead, Klein replied, sitting straight. Crestet maintained his earlier posture and casually asked, You said that your experience in the Divination Club allowed you to quickly master the potion? Yes, Klein answered frankly but didn't describe further. Crestet nodded slightly and said, And you said that your inspiration came from the maxim of the mystery priors and also Daly's example? Yes. Klein confirmed this first before explaining in detail. I found out from one of my teammates who was a mystery prior that those who abide by the maxim of the mystery priors have a lower probability of losing control than normal. After that, I heard that Madame Daly once said that she wanted to be a real spirit medium, and that she is a genius that leveled up to Sequence 7 within 2 years. After noticing both situations, I thought I could give it a try. I attempted to be a real seer and outlined some principles for a seer. The outcome was better than I expected. I mastered the potion very quickly. Your Grace, I'm not sure if you have had a similar experience. When I fully mastered the potion, there was a very special, very magical feeling. Klein described his experience as if he only vaguely understood the acting method. The man he had been when he was on Earth would have been nervous and embarrassed to speak so many half-lies before such a powerful Nighthawk. But ever since he transmigrated to the current world, he had lied so much that he was used to it. He could do it flawlessly. the darkness in Crestet's eyes disappeared, and his gaze returned to normal. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, it's not an illusion." From his answer, Klein couldn't see any doubt or scrutiny, so he felt at ease. Dunn endorsed your experience. "I believe that you really are a genius with a logical mind and sharp senses," Crestet complimented. He then asked, "Did you share your experience with your teammates?" "Of course," Klein admitted frankly. "I hope that I can help them lower the risk of losing control. We're teammates, comrades that face danger together. I don't have any reason to hide the truth. But for the same reason I didn't tell the clerks." Crestet uncrossed his right leg and sat up straight. His thin lips were exposed from the shadow of his collar. He lifted the corner of his lips and said, "Although you haven't even been with the Nighthawks for 2 months, I believe your understanding towards partners is much better than many others." I plan to share more information with you, but according to the Holy Cathedral's rules, you have to swear to the goddess that you won't reveal the contents of our conversation to anyone that doesn't know about this. That should be fine, right? I passed the test?" Klein was delighted. He nodded without hesitation. "No problem. Although I won't be able to teach others the acting method, I can let Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man do so indirectly." "All right." Crestet Casimir nodded. He leaned forward. "Then swear upon the holy artifact." As he was saying this, he bent down to lift the silver suitcase by his foot. "Holy artifact? The holy artifact that earned you the title of the goddess's sword." Klein looked at the actions of the deacon curiously. Crestet placed the suitcase on his knees, his dark green eyes instantly turning black. He lifted his hand, then pressed down. The cover of the silver suitcase, which resembled a violin case, suddenly dissolved and receded like the tide. At the same time, Klein felt that the light around him was being drawn forward as if it was being absorbed by the suitcase. Apart from the lights from the classic lamps that lined the walls, as well as the silver splendor that spiraled within the suitcase, the alchemy room turned pitch dark. The scene looked extremely strange. But, with a crisp snapping sound, Crestet Casimir opened the suitcase, revealing the pure white bone sword that lay within. It's a bone sword. The moment Klein saw the sword, he knew instinctively that it was mainly made out of bone. The short sword silently released a pure white glow in the pitch-dark alchemy room, as if it were a moon hanging high in the night sky, or a lighthouse in the middle of a storm. It looked as though the sword had no defects on its surface, but a closer examination would reveal that the surface of the sword was laced with layers of symbols and icons. These mysterious patterns intertwined to form the body of the sword. Klein observed the holy sword, suddenly realizing that he couldn't look away. His vision was being drawn towards the sword as his brown eyes slowly lost their luster. Crestet lifted the suitcase, moving the sword away from its original position. Klein instantly snapped out of his trance and finally freed himself from the nightmare he couldn't escape before. He cast his gaze to the side and asked gravely, "Your Grace, do you need me to put my hand on the holy sword?" "Yes, come over." Crestet's voice was melodious as if he was singing a lullaby. Klein stood up, still looking to the side as he took small steps forward. As it was dark, he couldn't see where the legs of the deacon were, nor his old leather boots. "Stop," Crestet spoke calmly. Klein immediately halted and stood on the spot. He took a quick glance at the pure white bone sword through the corner of his eyes before retracting his gaze again in fear. With that mere glance, he bent down and extended his right hand, accurately placing it atop the holy sword. A cold feeling swept through his skin and into his mind. The distracting thoughts and feelings of worry instantly eased, as if he was sitting on a roof in a noisy village, smelling the scent of the harvest and admiring the starry night sky. "Recite after me," Crestet said solemnly. "All right." Klein nodded. He then heard the deacon speak in Hermes. "O ever-night goddess, nobler than the stars and more eternal than eternity, I swear to you in my real name and my spirituality. I, Klein, will never reveal the details of the acting method to those who do not know of it from this moment forth. If I go against this, I shall accept any punishment you deem fit. Please witness my oath." Klein collected himself and made the oath in Hermes, following Deacon Sesemir's lead. He had the faint feeling that a connection has been established between him and a faraway being through the pure white bone sword. After retracting his right hand, he drew a crimson moon on his chest. "Praise the lady. Praise the lady." Crestet smiled and bowed in response. Immediately he closed the cover of the suitcase and pressed down heavily with his right hand. The darkness was instantly lit up as the light from the lamp once again filled the entire room. Klein noticed that the black eyes of Deacon Sesemir had regained their usual blackish green. He made his way back to his chair and frowned. He asked in puzzlement, "Acting method?" Crestet cleared his throat. Without answering the question directly, he instead smiled and said, "You might feel a little confused and not understand what I'm about to tell you, but I cannot explain why that is so, for that involves the secrets of the church. You will only have the right to know after you become an archbishop or a high-ranking deacon." Klein looked at Sesemir and added inwardly before Sesemir could say it, "You will only be permitted to know after you become a core member of the church, such as an archbishop or a high-ranking deacon," Crestet emphasized. Klein nodded sternly. Crestet placed the silver suitcase back beside his foot and crossed his legs. In the long history of time, the church has had generations upon generations of genius beyonders slowly figuring out a way to avoid losing control. And the core to this method is the name of the potion. It's not only critical, it's also the key. After looking at Klein's thoughtful expression, Crestet continued, "We have realized that the names of the potions all point to a certain group, and this group has their own approach and operates in unique ways. In simpler terms, there are a set of rules that come with the name of the potion, different rules for different potions. When we follow these rules strictly, the risk of losing control is reduced to a minimum. Similar to my set of seer principles?" Klein took the opportunity to ask. "This explanation isn't as simple or understandable as the one I gave to Justice and Hanged Man." Klein silently criticized. "Yes." Crestet gave an affirmative answer. "When we follow the rules of the potion, we become more and more like the group described by the name of the potion. In other words, we are acting as the job that the name of the potion points us toward. That is the acting method. You must remember the spirituality of every individual is special, unique. Even though the core rules must be followed by the people who consume the same potion, there are always certain variations to the rules that are unique to the individual. Thus, the experiences of others can only serve as a guide." "That is a point that I didn't realize," Klein said sincerely. "Thank you for informing me. I will remember that." Crestet laughed. "These are the experiences accumulated over the generations. After using the acting method, we not only gain mastery over the potion, we're also digesting it just as we would our food. When you truly digest the potion, you will feel a unique, mysterious sensation. Understood?" "I understand. Digestion, this term is very appropriate." Klein pretended to be deep in thought. After Crestet explained the method in more detail, Klein weighed his words as he asked, "Your Grace, since the name of the potion is not only the core but also the key, then how did the first Beyonders obtain them? I heard that it was recorded on the blasphemy slate." "Yes, that is correct," Crestet replied frankly. "But the blasphemy slate was inscribed with the ancient names. The names of the potions which we use today were derived in part from divine revelations. Some were also consolidated by the experiences of the Beyonders themselves." Klein nodded slowly. He pursed his lips and asked, "Your Grace, since the acting method is so effective, why wouldn't the church tell every Nighthawk about it?" "I have said that it is a secret of the church. You will understand the reason behind it once you become an archbishop or a high-ranking deacon," Crestet answered, unfazed. "All right, return upstairs and tell the rest of the Nighthawks to come down one at a time. I have to carry out the final step of the examination." That's to keep Fry and the others from divulging the acting method? Klein thought as he stood up. He then bade farewell, following the Nighthawk's etiquette. He made his way past the corridor and up the stairs, returning to the Blackthorn Security Company. He saw Dunn smoking his pipe near the entrance of the basement. With a smile, Klein took the initiative to say, "There shouldn't be any more problems. His Grace wants me to inform Fry and the others to head down for a conversation with him." "Yes, that is the last step. That means that there were no problems." Dunn put away his pipe and headed to the recreation room to tell the rest. As he watched Fry and Sika enter the basement, Klein suddenly recalled something. He said in a hurry, "Captain, are we going to have to get Royale, who's guarding over Cheney's gate, and Leonard, who's watching over the asylum? Oh, and Kenley, who's on break?" Dunn froze and pinched his forehead. "I forgot." He paused for a moment, then chortled. "But the matter shouldn't be too complicated. One of the advantages of having a high-ranking deacon examine you is that there's no need to send a telegraph to the Holy Cathedral, or engage in a cumbersome exchange of letters. He can make the decision on the spot and hand the formula to the clown potion as well as the main ingredients to you. That's not too bad." Klein couldn't contain his excitement. An hour and a half passed. As Kenley walked out of the alchemy room, his expression full of puzzlement, Klein was once again called downstairs. He met the high-ranking deacon once again, the goddess's sword, Crestet Sesamir, a second time. This time the golden brown-haired and blackish-green-eyed deacon wasn't seated. He stood there, allowing the breeze in the basement to blow at his black windbreaker. Crestet's collar stood tall, hiding his chin in the shadows. He looked at Klein and smiled. "Nighthawk Klein Moretti, I announce in the name of the goddess that you have passed the examination of the Holy Cathedral. Congratulations. With your contributions, you can immediately advance to become a Sequence 8 Beyonder." "Phew, I finally passed. I passed it just like that." When Klein heard Crestet Sesamir's announcement, he let out a breath of relief despite being mentally prepared for it. It felt surreal, as though it was a dream. He had assumed that the examination would be tougher and lengthier, but when he thought carefully about it, he realized that what had just happened was what should have happened. If he had taken the normal 3 years to digest the seer potion instead of doing it in a month, the examination wouldn't have even been conducted by the Holy Cathedral. The Tinjin Nighthawks captain would have been responsible for it instead. "I thought they would investigate my family and friends. Perhaps Sesamir arrived in Tinjin 2 days ago and completed that in secret. I also thought that the examination would require me to complete some task. I was really overthinking it. The goal of the examination is merely to determine the level of digestion for the potion, as well as detect any latent dangers, and see whether I'm aware of the acting method, and if I shared my experience with others." These thoughts flew past Klein's mind. He flashed a sincere smile. "Thank you, Your Grace. Praise the lady." Crestet nodded gently and said, "To advance is to serve the goddess better, so that you can protect our fellow believers better. You must remember this. Trust me, it'll help you fight the temptation of losing control." Temptation. Klein ruminated over the word. Crestet sized Klein up with his green eyes and said sternly, "The acting method can help you digest the potion and lower the risk of losing control, but it's not the be-all and end-all. To a certain extent, you can even confuse playing the role in your own existence. You know, there are many actors in the theater that develop severe psychological issues. At a certain level you might really go insane. Remember that you're only acting. The only point of note concluded by the City of Silver is identical to what Deacon Sesamir said." Klein nodded thoughtfully in agreement. "In addition," Crestet emphasized, "not only is losing control related to the potion, it's also closely related to your emotions and mental health. The most important thing for a Beyonder is to control yourself. Only then will you be able to withstand the temptations of evil gods and devils, resisting emotions like greed and jealousy and the erosion of desire. Of course, I don't mean that you should get rid of all your emotions and desires, because that is something that no human or even demigod can do. Yes, Perhaps only some special sequences are able to achieve that sort of state. Klein suddenly thought about old Neil. He couldn't help but ask in reply, "We must keep our emotions and desires at a reasonable level, and not allowing them to drive us to do something irrational and abnormal?" Crestet nodded solemnly. "Yes." After he answered, there were wrinkles at the corner of his eyes. "That's all I wanted to warn you about. Now I'll pass you the clown potion formula and the relevant ingredients." He bent down and put his silver suitcase on the long table. He then turned around and moved a few steps, blocking Klein's view. When the surrounding lights strangely vanished again, Klein suddenly understood that the formula and ingredients were in the suitcase that stored the holy artifact. It was simply because his gaze was attracted by the pure white bone sword, which was why he didn't notice, or perhaps he couldn't notice, the other items in the suitcase. After a few minutes, the light of the gas lamps lit up the alchemy room again. Crestet picked up his suitcase and moved away, presenting the items on the long table to Klein. Among them, the most eye-catching item was the palm-sized gray goat horn. It looked like a miniature version of a normal goat horn and was crystal clear, swirling with colors. There were faint layers of unique patterns. Next to the goat horn was a blue rose. There were red veins on the petals that connecting them together. It seemed to form a human face with a smile. Ha-ha-woo-ah, ha-ha-woo-ah. Klein heard illusory laughter and crying diffused with each other, and he saw pieces of gray halos floating in midair. A crystal of the single horn of a matured Hornaceous gray mountain goat and a complete stalk of a human-faced rose. The main ingredients of the clown potion. He nodded indiscernibly and took a few steps towards the long table. 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of torn apple juice, 7 grams of black-rimmed sunflower powder, 10 grams of golden cloak grass powder, 3 drops of poison hemlock. Klein looked at the unfurled goatskin parchment and compared the written content with the formula that he had memorized. After he confirmed that there was nothing wrong, he recalled the demonstration old Neil did. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly to collect his emotions. With the apparatus in the alchemy room, he distilled some pure water needed by the potion. In the potion formula, pure water referred to water that was distilled over and over again. Then he washed a black metal pot and threw in the supplementary ingredients one after another. He was as skillful as back when he had done chemistry experiments in high school. As the Beyonder ingredients hadn't catalyzed just yet, he didn't see any obvious changes in the liquid in the metal pot. At most, he only saw powder floating on the surface of the liquid. When he was done with the preparations, Klein cast his gaze at the 2 main ingredients and gratefully thought, "There's no description of the exact size or weight of the required gray mountain goat's single horn crystal or the human-faced rose. Perhaps a whole horn and a complete rose have no differences, regardless of their weight, allowing them to meet the requirements. Yes, in the world of mysterious Beyonders, this is definitely possible. If so, I don't have to worry about putting in excessive amounts of the main ingredients." After a few seconds, Klein picked up the human-faced rose and threw it into the metal pot. When the strange flower touched the liquid, it immediately produced a sizzling sound. The surrounding illusory laughter became shrill. Ha ha. Klein didn't delay any further as he immediately grabbed the crystalline mountain goat horn and threw it into the metal pot. Poof. The terrifying laughter disappeared all of a sudden, and the surrounding gray halos slowly converged into the metal pot. Klein lowered his head and saw the liquid in the pot was colored in a mix of gold, yellow, and red. However, the 3 colors remained extremely distinct at their boundaries. There were bubbles churning and fizzing from the liquid, but they failed to escape from the pot and ended up bursting silently. The scene reminded Klein of Sprite, the carbonated drink from his previous incarnation. This actually looks like a delicious drink. A thought popped into his head that aligned with the characteristics of his culture. Suppressing his nervousness, excitement, and anticipation, Klein poured the liquid from the black metal pot into a glass bottle. What shocked him was that there wasn't a single bit of the potion left in the metal pot. It really is a potion that turns people into Beyonders. Klein raised his right hand, and he looked at the beautiful-looking tricolored liquid. S16, who had been silent the entire time, suddenly smiled and said, "Don't worry. At the very least, I didn't notice any problems with the concoction of your potion. I've been waiting here to ensure that no accidents happen after you consume the potion. Don't worry, as long as it isn't anything serious, I should be able to save you." Klein nodded and placed the clown potion back onto the long table. Then he took off the silver chain inside his sleeve and let the topaz pendant hang down naturally, a slight distance above the liquid. To beyond of any other occupation, pendulum divinations could only divine a yes or no answer. Of course, when there wasn't enough information, the divination wouldn't yield any useful answers at all. When the pendulum didn't spin, it was called a failed divination. As a seer, Klein's pendulum could also vaguely determine the degree of the yes or no answer. Klein's eyes grew dark as he recited, "This potion is harmful. This potion is harmful." 7 times later he opened his half-closed eyes and saw the topaz pendant spinning clockwise, but very slowly. Clockwise means a positive response. In other words, it means that the potion is harmful. However, it spins slowly, which means that it's only slightly harmful. Yes, potions can bring about a loss of control, so there's the possibility of harm. A low level of harm means there is nothing wrong with the potion. Klein let out a breath of relief and wound the pendulum on his left wrist before covering it with his sleeve. At that moment, Crestet couldn't help but sigh. "You really are a professional seer. I must fully utilize my advantage, but I can't rely on it too much and think that it's all-powerful," Klein replied softly and took up the clown potion bottle. "After drinking it, I'll become a sequence 8 beyonder." The thought flashed in his mind and Klein didn't hesitate. He raised the bottle, tipped his head and gulped down the potion. Bitter. So bitter. Sucks totally. He instantly realized what it meant to look good on the outside but rotten on the inside. His face had contorted as a result of the potion. He wanted to puke but he couldn't. Then Klein realized that his face was flushed red. As for the rest of his body, they were experiencing a similar reaction. He was convinced that he looked like a steamed lobster. As for his spirit and mind, they felt like they had been extracted into a thin needle, fusing with the potion drop by drop as it stabbed into each and every one of cells. It was a feeling that needed no microscope to observe his cells. Klein stood there and saw the intruder invade his body's most minute areas. For a few seconds he felt like a robot that was having its parts and electrical circuits swapped out. After an unknown period of time had passed, his mind reflected his figure, as though he was listening to himself singing through his own ears. Due to this strange projection, Klein discovered that he could precisely control his facial and bodily motions. Meanwhile, his ears buzzed. He heard the murmurs and shouting echoing around him, which had not happened in a while. Hornasis, Phlegria. Hornasis, Phlegria. Hornasis, Phlegria. Phew. Klein imagined the layered spherical light and slowly entered a cogitation state. Bit by bit, he escaped from the state of having his spirituality seep out, where he had a slight loss of control. At that moment he knew that he had advanced successfully. He knew that he was a sequence 8 clown. After the color in Klein's eyes went back to normal, S16 said with a laugh, "You can move about and try to get used to the changes in your body. Try to find the core powers that were given to you by the clown potion." Klein nodded. He considered the fact that he might need guidance from the deacon and thus didn't care about his presence. He repeatedly followed what he had been practicing all this time as he took a step forward. He twisted his hips and threw a punch forward, launching a frontal jab. Pop! He heard the crisp sound of his fist breaking the air. The power in the forward thrust exceeded his expectations. In that instant he felt as though he was sitting in a carriage which had abruptly hit the brakes. He lost his balance and fell forward. Oh no. This is about to become an embarrassing story, just like Leonard's. Klein mused. But at that moment he noticed that he could still effectively control his muscles, his body as well as his center of gravity. He simultaneously exerted force with his spine, tendons, and ligaments, instantly adjusting his center of mass and managing to stand firm despite his distorted posture. Well, upon gaining some understanding of this, Klein attempted several other actions. He confirmed that the biggest change in his body was the massive increase in coordination. He would no longer lose his balance unless there were some extenuating circumstances. I feel like a roly-poly tumbler. I can even act in a circus now. It wouldn't be too hard for me to walk on a rope. The clown potion sure lives up to its name. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. Klein once again tested the extent of the improvements to his strength, agility, and speed. I should be around the same level as Teacher Gawain. After I get used to this and go through the specialized training, I'll definitely become more powerful. Also, with my current mastery over my body, it would be easy for me to grasp combat techniques. Klein stopped moving and nodded in thought. According to his plans, he estimated that he would become decent in combat arts only after half a year. But after consuming the clown potion, he felt that it would only take a month, perhaps 2 or 3 weeks, before he could qualify as a policeman that was adept in combat. That was the difference between an average person and a Beyonder. In a sense, the talents of Beyonders were beyond the reach of normal humans. Crestet watched silently as the newly advanced clown tried out various actions before completely stopping. He then nodded. It truly is a potion adept in the field of combat. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he asked, "What sounds did you hear just now?" "I heard someone muttering Hornacis." Klein wanted to keep the term Phlegria a secret for the time being. He wanted to observe the reaction of Deacon Casimir. If he was willing to relay information regarding the Hornacis mountain range and the nation of the Evernight, Klein would then add on, saying that he heard something different again. Crestet nodded slightly, skipping over the topic. He reminded Klein, "Remember, a high-sequence Beyonder can influence corresponding low-sequence Beyonders of the same sequence pathway to a certain extent. In a way, some parts of the respective pathways contain the realm of demigods. The murmurings and howls might have been intentionally conveyed to you by them. They might be filled with malicious intent. You must be even more cautious if the sequence pathway belongs to an evil god. I had a chat with Dunn just now. The Nighthawk in your team who lost control recently met with such a situation." O'Neill, the hidden sage. Klein's expression darkened. He nodded solemnly and said, "Your Grace, I will remember this. I will not be tempted by the murmurings or howls. I will not be corrupted by them." At the same time he thought of something else. Could this be the reason why the Church only provides the pathways for Sleepless and Corpse Collector, while hiding a large number of the other pathways? After all, the Sleepless pathway belongs to the Evernight goddess, and Death, which corresponds to the Corpse Collector pathway, has already fallen. As for why the Church would still offer the Mystery Prior and Seer, it's because these two jobs are of a support type and can fill the shortcomings of the Sequence 9 and 8 pathways for Sleepless and Corpse Collector. Furthermore, they're only at the beginning of the pathway, so the influence they can gather wouldn't be too prominent. But this doesn't explain why they would hide the names and unique traits of the potions, or the lack of information as to what one should take note of when facing them. Klein retracted his thoughts when he saw Crestet Casimir pick up his suitcase to leave. He adopted a curious tone. "Your Grace, I would like to know how to act as a clown. Do I have to go to a circus?" Crestet smoothed his tall collar and chuckled. "According to our current understanding of philosophy, you just made the mistake of formalism. You need to understand that the name of a potion not only represents a job. It also represents a group of people that share certain traits. For example, we can also describe seers differently. We can call them people who can see fate, yet remain respectful of fate. Of course, as I mentioned before, there are some differences to the rules concluded by each individual even if they consume the same potion. You cannot completely reference the experiences of another person, do you understand?" Klein nodded in thought. "I think I can understand some of it. I can act as a clown in my daily life as long as I have grasped its essence. In theory, Crestet answered, being careful about his choice of words. I understand. Klein drew a crimson moon on his chest. Thank you, Your Grace. May the goddess bless you. Just what is the essence of a clown? If I don't take into consideration what a clown represents back on Earth and only think about what it means in this world, a clown is a job that entertains people using ridiculous methods. For example, hilarious get-ups, exaggerated actions, trickster-like performances. The core is that it must be ridiculous and it must entertain others. Feels a little off. Must I consider it from the perspective of court jesters from ancient times? Klein thought about it silently as he felt at a loss. Crestet looked at him and also drew a crimson moon before his chest. He smiled, revealing the wrinkles at the corner of his eyes. May the goddess bless you too. At that moment, Klein suddenly perceived something, an intuition that felt like a prediction, that Deacon Casimir would put his left foot forward. He then saw Crestet pick up the silver suitcase and step toward the entrance of the alchemy room with his left foot. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Klein watched as Crestet walked out of the hidden door, his figure vanishing into the corridor. He was dazed for a moment before he felt intense excitement. The beyonder powers of the clown potion were more powerful than he imagined. He could intuitively predict a person's next course of action. Was the combination of this ability, coupled with his powerful coordination, exceptional agility and speed as well as decent strength, considered being good at fighting with artifice? Klein thought about this revelation. So this can be considered the manifestation of the seer's abilities in Sequence 8, but it's not enough. This pathway must be one that gives a unique ability every time I advance before reaching a high sequence beyonder. But the intuitions I get are fleeting, so I don't think I can take advantage of them every single time. Of course, this ability is powerful enough as it is. Taking advantage of it once should be enough to turn defeat into victory. Oh right, after I reduce the influence of the negative effects that come with the clown potion, I can try the ritual to summon myself. I nearly forgot about that. Yeah, the captain must have infected me with his awful memory. In the midst of his thoughts, Klein observed himself once again. He wanted to see if the clown potion had brought along any other abilities. According to the confidential records of the Nighthawks, if the potion would allow the person who consumed it to gain mastery over a certain spell, the person would be able to faintly detect what kinds of spells he obtained after advancing, as if he was being instilled with knowledge. But I don't sense any of that. In other words, Clown doesn't come with the ability to quickly cast spells, as reported in the confidential records of the Nighthawks. Could the meaning of crafty be that I can now effectively use my expressions and body language to more easily fool people with my lies? Klein stretched his neck while seriously analyzing his current condition. At this moment he couldn't help but think back to the suited clown he had encountered previously. The clown's peculiar and varied spells had left a deep impression. That member of the secret order is probably a Sequence 7 beyonder. His clown getup was purely to mask his facial features to avoid being placed on a wanted list. It's no wonder that he could hold his own against 2 Sequence 7s and a Sequence 8. If he had deciphered the fact that I wasn't under the influence of sealed artifact 2-049 and avoided falling under its control, 10 of me might not have been enough to deal with him. Of course, Clown is not completely devoid of spells. There are still spells like these. Klein walked toward the long table and picked up the piece of paper that the clown formula was written on. His pupils darkened and with a flick of his wrist he tossed the piece of paper into the air. Pop! It was as if the soft piece of paper had become a dagger, and it pierced itself into the wall of the alchemy room. I can bring a deck of tarot cards with me in the future. They can be used both for divination or as weapons. Klein collected himself and started to pack up the objects left behind from the potion's concoction. After dealing with this and burning the formula for the potion, Klein exhaled and left the alchemy room, closing the secret door behind him. For the time being, he didn't feel like trying to entertain others through ridiculous methods because of what happened to old Neil. He intended to lessen the influence of the potion through cogitation first. Phew, this is going to be a brand new experience again. No matter what happens, I'm no longer just a supporting member. Yes, ever since old Neil passed away, I'm the only one left in the Tingen Nighthawks team that can provide support. The Holy Cathedral will most likely send a mystery prior or a seer to the team. Klein followed the wall lamps, walking down the dark corridor, and calmly made his way up the stairs leading to the Blackthorn Security Company. He then saw the sunlight in the Nighthawks recreation room. The sunlight shone in through the oriel window, sunlight which was pure and warm. Klein turned towards the captain's office and saw that the door was wide open. Dunn Smith was leaning back in his chair, sniffing at his pipe. When Dunn swept his gray eyes at him, he changed his seating posture. You seem to be in good shape, nothing like someone who had just consumed a potion. This might be the advantage of fully digesting a potion before leveling up. Klein closed the door behind him and took a seat. He and Dunn both knew about the acting method, so their oath didn't keep them from talking about the acting method with each other. They could exchange their thoughts about it, but the two of them didn't bring it up with a tacit understanding. They fell silent at the same time after the exchange. Klein thought and asked, "Has His Grace left?" "Yes, as a high-ranking deacon he has other matters to take care of." Dunn thought for a moment. "Oh, he took the pair of red eyeballs that remained after old Neil died." Klein was shocked and confused. "Why?" Dunn picked up his coffee and took a sip. He answered after a long silence, "We shouldn't lie to ourselves. A rampager is in fact already a monster, and as I told you before, monsters leave behind things that are rich with beyonder powers after they die. When these relics can't be controlled, they have to be sealed. Yes, that is one of the most common origins of sealed artifacts. According to the Nighthawk's internal rules, the items left behind by rampagers need to be stored elsewhere, so that they won't trigger their partners. A logical rule." Klein nodded heavily. Suddenly he sharply noticed that the captain had missed out something. So he asked curiously, "What if the item left behind is controllable?" Dunn looked at him, his gray eyes were deep like a quiet night. He sighed and said, "You wouldn't want to know the answer." Klein was taken aback before he suddenly realized a possibility. Normal monsters left behind beyonder ingredients which could be used to make potions. But what of a rampager who turned into a monster? If they left behind controllable items, would those things be used as beyonder ingredients? Upon realizing that, Klein suddenly felt a strong sense of disgust. He couldn't help but turn his head to retch. Even his sight suddenly grew blurry. This is such a terrifying theory. But it's an answer that's highly likely of being closer to the truth. In that instant he had a deeper understanding of sayings like, "To fight against the abyss, we have to endure the corruption of the abyss, and we are guardians but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness." Would this be one of the reasons why the church hides the acting method? So that they can recycle a certain number of their own members for spare parts? But this will make members of the upper echelons reject the church. Klein's face clearly reflected his changing expressions. Upon seeing his response, Dunn suddenly laughed. There was a twinkling light in his gray eyes. "Think about it on the brighter side of things. You can think of it as our teammates watching over us in a different form. They will be with us forever." After saying that, Dunn lowered his head, picked up his coffee and brought it to his mouth. After nearly 20 seconds of silence, he lifted his head and said, "And you don't have to worry. As long as we can find sources of beyonder ingredients, we wouldn't do what you were thinking about. Alright, according to the rules, you'll receive a day off since you just advanced. You can decide whether or not you want to go to your combat training this afternoon, but you have to inform Gawain either way." Klein gently nodded. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his back and said, "Captain, I have finished my lessons on mysticism. I'd like to use my mornings to learn techniques such as tracking and monitoring." He paused and added with a serious expression, "I'd like to fulfill my full duty as a Nighthawk soon." Dunn gave him a piercing look and sighed. "You're tougher than I imagined." "As you wish." "Yes, Captain." Klein suddenly stood up and drew a crimson moon on his chest. After leaving the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein didn't return home to rest, but instead took the opportunity to take a trackless carriage to Azek's place. Ding dong, ding dong. As the doorbell rang clearly, Azek opened the door in a white shirt and black vest. There was a gold watch chain hanging from his vest pocket. Don't you need to work? Azek took a glance at the sky and realized that the sun had yet to climb to its peak. I actually have most of the day off due to some special circumstances, Klein explained vaguely. Azek looked at him and appeared to notice something as he nodded and made way for Klein's entry. At the hallway, Klein set his cane aside, took off his hat and followed Azek to the living room. The living room was comfortably furnished with a fireplace, rocking chair, couches and a coffee table. Klein sat at his usual spot. Azek sat down opposite Klein and pointed at the cigars on the coffee table. Do you want one? No. Klein shook his head firmly. Azek didn't attempt to persuade him as he struck a match and lit one of the cigars. At the same time he asked casually, Have you taken care of the matter at Morristown? I have to thank you for that, Klein replied sincerely. At the same time he secretly lampooned Mr. Azek. Before you lost your memories, you definitely must have left behind quite a sizable wealth for yourself. Otherwise, how could a teacher who isn't even an associate professor be able to enjoy cigars so frequently? As Azek was fiddling with his cigar, Klein brought up a matter. Mr. Azek, I have something to ask you. What is it? Azek replied without lifting his head. Klein paused and organized his words. One of my colleagues lost control and became a monster. I'd like to know if his spirit was contaminated. He wasn't certain if Mr. Azek knew the meaning of losing control, so he prepared an explanation just in case. Azek stopped what he was doing and lifted his head to look at Klein. He nodded heavily and said, No doubt. You have to be very careful in a situation like that. If he lost control due to the temptation of an evil god or devil, try to avoid contacting his spirit. It might very likely lead to life-threatening danger. I understand. Klein let out a breath of disappointment. When he was at old Neil's place, he was too emotional and had forgotten to contact old Neil's spirit. Neither did Dunsmith remind him at all. Hence he missed the opportunity entirely. Now that I think of it, Captain didn't forget but intentionally avoided bringing it up. Klein was silent in thought. He didn't dwell on the topic and instead mentioned his previous encounter. Mr. Azek, I tried to divine the origins of Morristown's paranormal incidents. I ended up seeing an upside-down pyramid that extended underground. My teammate told me that it's a symbol of death. Only his descendants would receive such an honor. Azek put down the match and took up the cigar cutter when he suddenly fell into a daze. He was motionless for quite a while. He leaned back into his seat and wore an unusually gloomy expression. After a while he said in a deep voice, This gives me a very familiar feeling, but I don't seem to be recalling anything. I'm very sorry. Klein sighed sincerely. He had imagined that he could use the revelation obtained from his divination to further jolt Mr. Azek's memories. Azek cut off the cigar cap, shook his head and smiled bitterly. If it was something that could be recalled easily, I think I would have long found a way to escape my fate. Of course, I have to thank you for your kindness. Thank you for remembering about me this entire time. He thought for a moment before adding, Oh, and I'll be leaving Tingen in the near future. Why? Klein asked in surprise. Didn't we say that we were going to find the manipulator behind the scenes, the person who affected my fate and stole your child's skull? Azek held his cigar and sighed before explaining. The target might have noticed my attention and investigation. He hasn't been taking any action recently, leaving me with no clues. Thus, I'm thinking of leaving Tingen for the time being and going to Backlund. On one hand, I can take the opportunity to search for traces that I left behind before I lost my memories. On the other hand, my absence might let the target lower his guard. That's right. Mr. Azek's last memory loss was around Backlund University. It's a pity that you can't take my place searching for the Red Chimney House. Klein nodded solemnly and said, "I'll pay close attention to this. Once the target takes action and exposes himself, I'll inform you immediately." "Mr. Isaac, how will I inform you of things in a timely manner?" Klein had the idea that if Isaac was Death's descendant, or if he was linked to Death in a certain way, his powers would have been something similar to the corpse collector sequence. He definitely had a way to call something like Daly's messenger. In other words, this could confirm if Isaac was actually related to Death or a descendant of Death. Isaac took a puff of his cigar and thought for nearly 20 seconds. He took out an ornament from his left sleeve. It was an intricate but old copper whistle. There were many unique patterns that filled it with a mysterious aura. "This is something that I had with me when I woke up in Backlund. When you blow it, you'll summon a messenger that belongs to me." Isaac held the copper whistle as he explained in detail. "After so many years, this copper whistle can still be used? This should be a mystical item, right?" Klein was surprised and delighted that he had indirectly proved that Mr. Isaac was related to Death. Isaac gave Klein a glance, then he put the copper whistle to his mouth and demonstrated. His cheeks puffed up as he blew with all his might. Its body was made of white bones and there were dark flames glowing in its eye sockets. It was almost 4 meters tall and it towered over Klein, who wasn't even 175 centimeters tall. Nothing was heard, but Klein felt a sudden gloominess and coldness. He quickly tapped his left molar and saw that there were blurry white bones being thrown up from the ground, one after another, forming a strange fountain. After a few seconds, there was an illusory monster in the living room. As he watched its head nearly tear through the ceiling, Klein suddenly had a thought. "Mr. Isaac, isn't your messenger a little too exaggerated?" Isaac didn't share those thoughts at all. He smiled and said, "After you pass the letter to it, blow the whistle again to end the summoning. Then it'll send the letter to me very quickly in a secretive manner." After that, Isaac shook his wrist and threw the old copper whistle across the room. Klein extended his right hand and accurately caught it. He found it cold but mild. "Thank you, Clown Potion." He breathed a sigh of relief. He wiped the whistle and blew it hard. Silently, the huge messenger fell apart as blurry white bones sank underground. The Tussock River ran through Backlund and harbors that dotted around the area. Alger Wilson wore the long priest robes of the Church of Storms as he walked down from the passenger ship slowly. He saw people walking to and fro around the harbor with countless port workers sweating under the sun. It was a bustling yet noisy scene. "It's been a while, Backlund," Alger muttered to himself. After leaving Isaac's house, Klein took a public carriage back to Daffodil Street. As he opened the door to his house, he suddenly saw a figure sitting in his dining room. Klein instinctively tightened his grip on the cane in his hand, but quickly realized what was going on. It wasn't a thief but his maid, Bella. Bella was focused on reading a spread-out newspaper on the table. She jumped in shock when she heard the door open, quickly standing up and stammering, I was just done with the tasks for the morning. I was waiting for the water to boil so that I could eat some bread. I'm still not really used to having a maid in the house." Klein mocked himself. He took off his hat and nodded. Reading is a good habit. To be able to persist in reading despite the busy workload is something that's encouraged by the goddess. He used the name of the goddess just in case Bella took his compliment as sarcasm. But in reality only the god of knowledge and wisdom would place this much emphasis on reading. Of course, all of the church's advocate education. Yes, since she's about 18 years old and believes in the goddess, Bella's love for reading must be influenced by her parents. Parents like this would send their daughter to receive an education as long as they can afford it. Even if they cannot afford public schools, there are always the free schools provided by the church. At most it would just delay her education. Thus, Bella isn't illiterate. She can understand words and read the newspaper. Klein thought as he walked into the living room after setting his cane down. He had quite a good impression of Bella. Even though she was a little clumsy and obviously not used to the kitchen, she had shown a willingness to learn. Bella let her hands hang down and said, embarrassed, I didn't have the opportunity to read many newspapers in the past. The landlord didn't let us use old newspapers to clean the walls. I stole a glance at it when I picked up the newspapers just now to clean the coffee table. I thought that it was rather interesting. What a pitiful lady. When I transmigrated, newspapers were the least interesting of things. Klein thought as he lampooned. He smiled and took out the silver pocket watch from his pocket. After looking at the time, he said, "As long as you complete your tasks and do them well, you are free to do whatever you want with the rest of your time. You don't need to be too nervous. Of course, if I'm having a chat with Benson and Melissa, it's best that you stay in your room. I will allow you to use the lamp inside and take a few old newspapers with you. Oh, please knock at my door at 1 in the afternoon, then prepare a cup of side black tea, 2 pieces of soft white bread, a piece of wheat toast and a small plate of butter for me." In order to celebrate his advancement to Sequence 8, Klein decided to spoil himself slightly. He was going to eat the white bread ahead of Benson, who was planning on having it over the weekend. "Well, I'll buy 8 more pounds of bread soon. In the future we shall make the change in our staple dish from wheat bread to white bread. As a Sequence 8 Beyonder, my weekly pay is definitely going to increase." To think that the captain didn't mention this. He forgot again. Klein froze for a moment and decided to clarify it tomorrow. "All right," Bella replied in surprise and joy. Following that, she asked with a little uncertainty, "Mr. Klein, do you mean the side black tea used to entertain guests?" She called him by his first name, as Moretti could be used to refer to anyone in the family. "Yes, that shall be my usual tea in the future." Klein waved his hand and made his way towards the stairs. He suddenly noticed that he was in a decent financial situation after becoming a clown. This was partly because there were no other large expenses for the time being. He only needed to spend 2 solely on transport while he was investigating the houses with red chimneys, and on the materials that he needed to purchase occasionally. Claims could be made for the latter most of the time anyway. Also, there was a sum of £300 in Klein's anonymous bank account. It was important to understand that 1 ar of land in the countryside only cost 5 to 6.5 solely, which was another way of saying that Klein could afford 920 to 1200 ares of farmland, which was equivalent to 137 to 179 mao-2 back on Earth. Furthermore, this sum of money could allow Klein to buy a house on Daffodil Street on a contract for 15 years. "If I convert all that money into land, I'll get between 23 and 31 pounds a year in rent. That's not bad, but not necessary for the time being. I'll use that £300 for emergencies. I'll have to find an opportunity to tell Benson and Melissa about my true weekly salary," Klein thought as he entered his room. After locking the door to his room, Klein sat on the edge of his bed and started his cogitation. He wanted to use this method to slowly control the power seeping out of his potion. He was very careful and very cautious. He had thought of the term losing control very lightly until he saw the mandated Punisher who had lost control. Of course, he didn't know that mandated Punisher personally. He also didn't know what had happened to him. He subconsciously thought of him as an anomaly, a rare case. It was just like how an average person would make comments about a murder they saw on the news before forgetting about it entirely. But what happened to old Neil shook Klein greatly. It made him realize very clearly that losing control was always a possibility, always around him. Loss of control might descend upon him in ways he had never thought about. That sure was a bloody lesson. Klein ended his cogitation and muttered to himself as he opened his eyes. He had dreamed of that scene many times in the past few days, jolting awake in the process and finding himself drenched in cold sweat. He wasn't only grieving old Neil's death, but also worried about his future. If he didn't have cogitation to help him sleep, he believed that there would be many sleepless nights in his future. Other than digesting the potion, I also have to try my best to control my emotions and desires. I have to keep them within reasonable levels and not be consumed by them. Klein exhaled and laid down, quickly falling asleep. On the day that old Neil passed away, Dunn's actions and words had touched him greatly. It made him critically assess the responsibilities of a Nighthawk for the first time. It made him want to take up his responsibilities and help his captain and teammates. Thus, he didn't intend to waste his afternoon. He was going to continue his combat lessons. 3 in the afternoon on a crude training field. The blonde crew-cut Gawain creased his brows as he witnessed Klein slowly familiarize himself with the motions, going from the movements of a decent beginner to the movements of an apprentice knight who had been practicing for a good 6 months. All this happened in the short span of 40 minutes. He called for Klein to stop and sized him up. He couldn't help but ask, "What happened?" Klein had already come up with an excuse. He was prepared to attribute his performance to scientific research when Gawain added, "You don't need to answer if it's inconvenient for you to do so." It looks like there was some communication between the police department and Gawain. It makes sense, he has to train Beyonders occasionally, so how could he not know? Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He smiled as he said, "Teacher, how long do you think I will need before I can take part in actual combat?" Gawain crossed his arms and looked at Klein seriously. He replied with a raspy voice, 2 or 3 days, but that isn't enough." He explained as if in thought, "Being able to take part in actual combat isn't the same as being good at fighting. The latter would take another 2 to 3 weeks. Furthermore, you need to gain mastery over weapons that you can bring with you, for example, a cane, whips, daggers, and bayonets. There's still so many to learn." Klein was dumbfounded. Gawain swept his experienced gaze at him. "Remember, every drop of sweat you lose here might save your life in the future." "Yes, teacher." Klein pumped himself up and answered. On Sunday morning, Klein entered the Blackthorn Security Company and knocked on the door of the captain's office. Dunsmith looked up as if he was expecting this. "I forgot to inform you yesterday. Your position at the police department has risen from probationary inspector to inspector now that you have advanced to sequence 8. I'll get them to issue the appropriate documents and epaulets to you as soon as possible. Your weekly salary will also increase from £6 to £10. The church and the police department will each bear half of your salary. This salary is the level of an experienced Nighthawk. Of course, I mean an experienced Nighthawk at sequence 9. Captain, are you following the wrong script?" Klein was taken aback as he listened to the captain. His eyebrows relaxed as he smiled. "That's more than I imagined." He had imagined that his weekly salary would only increase to £8. Dunn lifted his cup of coffee and took a sip. "The increase in salary for Nighthawks is firstly dependent on years of service, second on contribution, and third on the level of your job. The third criterion is often highly correlated with your contributions. Right, without any contributions, even if one were to digest their potion, they would be unable to apply for the formula and materials." Klein nodded while in thought. A weekly salary of £10, coupled with any bonuses, would mean a yearly salary of about £540. Since he didn't need to pay any taxes, this salary was fairly high in the middle income bracket, just lower than desirable occupations such as esteemed lawyers, famous architects, experienced surgeons, and government workers. Even the vice president of the Lone Kingdom's treasury only makes £700 a year before tax. That's at most £640 after tax, probably lower. According to the newspapers, a decent house in Backland and Hillston only costs about £2,500. With Benson, Melissa, and my current expenditure, we could buy one in 7 or 8 years. To be able to afford a bungalow in the central area of the capital in just 7 or 8 years purely through my own efforts. This salary makes me happy indeed." Klein got up and bade farewell. He quickly walked to the basement and took his shift at Cheney's gate. Before it was 10, he suddenly heard someone approaching Cheney's gate. Soon after, Dunn appeared at the door. "There's a case that requires your help." "An incident involving Beyonders?" Klein instinctively asked. "No, a parliamentary representative of this city, Mr. Maynard, was found dead in his house. The Tingen Police Department is under huge pressure and wants us to use a mediumship ritual to help them pinpoint the murderer." Currently, you are the only person on the team who can do that, Dunn explained. Then he added, the Holy Cathedral will send over a mystery prior to our team next week. Actually, it should have been done a long time ago, but you happened to join and chose to be a seer. How long has the Member of Parliament been dead for? Klein asked straightforwardly as he packed up his things. If it was more than 15 minutes, the information that he could obtain would decline considerably. If it was more than an hour, there would be very little left to find. If it was more than a month, contact with the spirit of the dead would most likely fail. Regrettably, the initial autopsy report shows that Mr. Maynard died between 9 and 11 last night. Dunn shook his head and said, you only need to provide assistance and not consider if you can be of use. All right. Klein took his coat and walked out of the duty room with his hat and cane in hand. Dunn Smith took his place at the Cheney's Gate guardroom. Theoretically, as a Beyonder, as long as one's spirituality was enhanced, things like spirit vision, divination, and ritualistic magic could be learned. Especially for Beyonders from the Sleepless sequence who were known for their high spirituality. But in actual fact, the differences between the various sequences was vastly obvious. Dunn Smith and Leonard Mitchell had learned spirit vision, but they could only see faint white or light blue in the auras of others. They were unable to precisely differentiate the status of different body parts. Of course, they could definitely see spiritual things with spirit vision, but doing so wasn't as effective as using their spiritual perception. That also led to a problem in which Beyonders at the Sleepless, Midnight Poet and Nightmare sequences didn't enjoy activating their spirit vision. Similarly, if they were willing to, they could also learn spirit pendulums, dowsing, dream divination, and so on. But their rate of success wasn't something worth noting. It was the same situation with ritualistic magic as well. When the two of them walked past one another, Dunn suddenly said, I forgot to tell you that Inspector Tolley is in charge of the case. He's waiting for you at the reception hall in the security company. Remember to change into your new uniform and grab your new documents. Klein wasn't surprised and replied with a smile, New uniform, new documents? The Tianjin Police Department sure is efficient. He had just advanced to Sequence 8 the day before. It's because this case is very important, so... Dunn spread his hands and took up Klein's previous spot. Klein walked upstairs, but he wasn't in a hurry to go to the reception hall. He entered the Nighthawk's break room and entered the attached bathroom to relieve himself. There was only a toilet bowl, a water bottle, and a bucket in the duty room. Then he changed into his police uniform that revealed his promotion to 2 silver stars and put on his peak cap with the 2 crossed swords and a crown. After transferring his flaring sun charm, Azek's copper whistle, his ritual ingredients and other items, Klein smoothed out his uniform, took his cane and exited the break room. He passed through the partition and saw Inspector Tolley seated in the sofa area. It had been a while since they last met. The tall police officer seemed to have gained some weight, and his stomach was even more outstanding. With his thick mustache and hair, he looked like a brown bear that had just escaped from a circus. I'm glad to work with you again. When Tolley saw that it was a Nighthawk that he knew, he let out a breath of relief. He stood up and extended his bare paw. No pump. Klein corrected himself and shook the other person's hand as a polite gesture. Me too. Tolley stole a glance at Klein's 2 shimmering silver stars shoulder strap and said with envy, We're at the same rank now, and it hasn't even been a month. At first, Klein wanted to reply solemnly that, the danger that we encounter is 10 times worse than yours. But he remembered his identity then. Sequence 8 Clown. Maybe I can give it a try. Using his spirituality, he looked at the reflection of his facial expression. He lifted the corner of his lips and replied with a smile, Maybe in another few months you'll have to call me sir. You sure are humorous. Tolley chuckled and pointed at the door. Shall we head out? All right. Klein hadn't given up his cane. Now that he had become a clown, the cane was truly a viable weapon. After exiting the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein and Tolley walked down side by side, forming a great contrast due to the skinniness and fatness of the two. I feel like we could even make an audience at the circus laugh, Klein suddenly jested. Tully nodded in absolute agreement and said, yes, I feel our vast contrast brings a comedic effect. Do you know that some circuses are trying to use fat and skinny, tall and short clown combinations in their performances? No, actually I meant a beast tamer and a brown bear. Klein, of course, wouldn't make such a rude remark. He went along with it and replied, it's a pity that there are no fixed circuses in Tianjin. That's right, but we have operas, theaters and music halls, Inspector Tully replied wistfully. They casually chatted until they got onto the police carriage. Then Klein redirected the topic back to the case. Is it confirmed that Mr. Maynard was murdered? We can't be certain, but his wife and 2 sons aren't willing to believe the possibility that he died due to a sudden illness. And there was really something wrong at the scene. When Maynard was found, he was naked on the guest room's bed, Tully said as he deliberated. He sleeps separately from his wife? Klein leaned back against the carriage wall and mimicked the main character in various detective films. Tully shook his head and said, no, his wife hasn't been in Tianjin recently. She went to Backlund to attend a very important social ball. You might not know, but she's the leader of a new party. She's the daughter of someone from the House of Commons. She's still on her way back to Tianjin via steam locomotive. She merely used the telegram to express her opinion on this matter. Maynard is also a member of the new party. He's been a Tianjin's member of parliament for more than 10 years. He intended to run for mayor in next year's election. In other words, his death might be related to this? Klein asked casually and immediately laughed. I'm sorry, I'm only supposed to be helping with the autopsy. The rest of the matter is not within my area of concern. You don't have to answer. Tully didn't mind much but sighed. Autopsy. You're very cautious. As for your guesses, I would only say that there's a possibility. There was a gathering last night at Maynard's place. There were too many guests and we temporarily can't find any main suspects. Plus, these guests have decent backgrounds, so we have to be very careful. We can't make any mistakes. I understand. Klein nodded faintly and asked about the details of the scene. Maynard's house was a bungalow located in the Golden Indus borough. It was surrounded by gardens and fields. There was a stable, a fountain, and a broad pathway built from cement. Klein put on his peak hat with its police badge and followed behind Inspector Tully. They passed through the police streamer and entered the double-story house under the gaze of every policeman present. In the living room, there were 2 male and 4 female probationary inspectors who were talking to people individually to gather statements. Klein looked around and saw many gentlemen in tuxedos and a few ladies in glamorous dresses and checkered gauze hats. They're the guests who spent the night here, Tully explained and led Klein up the stairs to the 2nd floor directly. Along the way, when the police constables who were searching through the rooms saw the 2, they revealed a look of respect without stopping them. Perhaps it was the effect of the inspector epaulets. This is the guest room where Maynard's corpse was discovered. The brawny Tully stopped by the crimson wooden door. Klein thought and asked, which guest was assigned to this guest room? Nobody. There are too many guest rooms in the house, so it wasn't used. Tully put on his white gloves and turned the knob of the crimson wooden door. He made the constable who was keeping watch leave temporarily. Then he nodded at Klein and said, Inspector Moretti, I'll leave the rest to you. May the goddess bless us, and I hope that we find something. Klein put on his white gloves too and locked the door behind him. He walked to the side of the bed and saw that the crimson bedsheets were abnormally messy. The corpse laying on it was covered with a white cloth. At this point, Klein could be considered to be quite experienced. He pulled away the white cloth without fear and looked at Member of Parliament Maynard. The man was in his 40s. His blonde hair was trimmed short, and his expression was a mixture of pain and happiness. Klein took 2 steps back and took out the ingredients he needed. He quickly finished the setup for the mediumship ritual. As the faint calming fragrance swirled around him, he recited the divination statement that he thought of long ago, the cause of Maynard's death. The cause of Maynard's death. As he recited the statement, Klein retreated to a nearby high-back chair and sat down slowly. His eyes darkened, then he leaned back and quickly fell into a deep sleep. In the illusory and blurry world, he suddenly saw the gentleman from earlier. With his opened blue eyes, Maynard was laying prostrate above a woman with an outstanding body and fair skin. He was thrusting hard against her body. He first displayed an expression of extreme satisfaction and happiness. Then he suddenly clutched his chest with his right hand. His expression then grew contorted. But as Maynard fell, the image quickly shattered. Klein opened his eyes and woke up from his dream. I can't believe I can actually watch porn in such a manner. So Maynard had an affair and died of exhaustion? Klein chuckled and massaged his temples. He took out a pen and paper before doing another ritual. He drew a portrait of the lady he had seen in his dream with the aid of the ritual. Of course, everything below her neck was omitted. It was a woman whose age was hard to tell. She had the mature vibe of a woman in her 30s, but there was a remnant of innocence to her. Her eyes were crystal clear and she had a delicate look. Klein looked at his work, then put away his ritual ingredients and dispelled the spirituality wall. He leaned sideways to grab his silver-edged cane. Suddenly, he heard the reverberating sound of someone clearing their throat. He immediately got goosebumps. Klein looked towards the bed and saw Maynard gripping the crimson bedsheets so tightly that the tendons on the backs of his hands were protruding out. With a swoosh, the Member of Parliament who died between 9 and 11 the previous night suddenly sat up. Saliva drooled from the corners of his lips as he opened his vacant eyes wide. Before Klein could come up with any new ideas, he saw the rigid Maynard lift both his hands up. Its body lunged forward to his left amidst the sound of hurtling wind. In the past, his dulled reactions under such sudden, unexpected situations would have made it hard for him to avoid this. Even if he had noticed the attack ahead of time, he would have had to roll away to avoid the fast-moving corpse. But now Klein could nearly react on instinct. He stomped down with his bright, buttonless leather boots and jumped diagonally onto the high-back chair. As it had only been a day since he advanced, he was still getting used to his power, agility, and speed. He had accidentally leaped too high into the air and landed on the top of the chair's high back. It was a narrow edge. Klein's heart tightened as he quickly controlled his body and adjusted his center of gravity. He wavered for a moment and surprisingly managed to stabilize himself, like a black cat flaunting its balance and poise. As he was wavering, he flailed his left arm, swinging his cane into the zombie's ribs as it pounced forward. The strike caused it to lose its balance as it staggered and fell onto the carpet. Klein was standing on top of the chair as he felt for his revolver by raising his right arm. He attempted to pull it out from the holster so that he could deliver a silver demon hunting bullet at the zombie in front of him. But in that instant he suddenly wondered about the aftermath. If he were to blow a hole in Member of Parliament Maynard's corpse, how was he going to explain the cause of death to the deceased's family or members of Parliament who were focusing on the matter? All I did was double-tap his corpse? As he was thinking, Klein reached into the pocket of his police uniform and felt for a triangular plate. The Requiem charm. He quickly made a decision. He took out the silver amulet without hesitation and let out a low shout in Hermes, "Crimson!" As the incantation reverberated within the room, the charm started to release a peaceful aura. Klein quickly infused his spirituality into the amulet and tossed it to zombie Maynard, who was struggling to get up. A cold blue fire appeared, enveloping the triangular plate. A serene and gentle black aura spread forth rapidly, eliminating the anxiety and worry of the soul. Zombie Maynard stopped there, his eyes staring blankly at the ground. His saliva dripped onto the carpet. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and planned to take out the materials and set up a ritual to purify the desecrated being. But suddenly Maynard once again let out a groan, his blank eyes focused on the left pocket of Klein's police uniform again. Klein leaped from the top of the chair to the ledge of the oriel window. At the same time he heard the sound of the chair breaking. Klein had no choice but to take out a rectangular silver plate. The slumber charm. It wasn't only living things that could be put into a deep sleep. The dead were in a state of eternal sleep and would only be woken up under unusual circumstances. In certain books on mysticism, there was even such a description regarding zombies. They slumber by the day and wake up in the night. Crimson. Klein once again recited the incantation in Hermes. He intended to disregard the consequences and shoot the corpse with his revolver if that failed again. The problems that came later wouldn't matter if he was dead. As he felt the silver rectangular plate in his palm turn cold, Klein injected his spirituality into it and tossed the charm out. A dark red flame illuminated his eyes as the sound of a light explosion reverberated around the room. A gentle power spread forth, bringing with it a fatigue that affected every living being. Zombie Maynard had just propped himself up using the chair when he wavered. His eyes closed and he fell on his back with a plop. With what had just happened, Klein didn't dare to relax. He immediately took out the amantha extract distilled from night vanilla, slumber flower and chamomile, as well as the bark of the drago tree, and the full moon essence oil made from moonflowers. He quickly set up a sacrificial altar. Right on the heels of that, he sealed the surrounding area with a spirituality wall with the aid of holy night powder, encompassing the altar and the sleeping zombie Maynard. After silently reciting the incantation and lighting 3 corresponding candles, he dripped a few drops of essential oil extract and scattered various powders onto the flames. Klein then took a step back and cautiously looked at zombie Maynard. He then recited in Hermes, "O ever-night goddess, nobler than the stars and more eternal than eternity. I pray for your loving grace. I pray that you look over your loyal guardian. I pray for the power of the crimson. I pray for the power of sleep and silence. I pray that you purify the unclean being around me," the gentleman once called John Maynard. Moonflower, a herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Slumber flower, a herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. It was as if a midnight breeze blew within the wall of spirituality. A thin veil of black steam started to billow from zombie Maynard. When everything settled, Klein used his spirit vision and divination to repeatedly confirm that the zombie wouldn't awaken once more. After seeing the results, his worries eased. He ended the ritual and dispelled the wall of spirituality. Why would he suddenly come back to life? Klein stood in front of Maynard, who was on the carpet. He knitted his brows as he looked down at the corpse. To a beyonder with high spiritual sensitivity, there were obvious signs to note if a corpse would come back to life or not, much less Klein, who was a seer. He often had a premonition of similar matters, but what had happened just now completely took him by surprise. Unless there is a more mysterious influence at play, just like what happened with the suited clown. Klein recalled the scene in his head and faintly sensed the problem. Zombie Maynard had been trying to attack the left pocket of his police uniform. Left pocket? Klein transferred his black cane to his right palm, then reached for the pocket with his left hand. He took out the ancient copper whistle that was inside. It was a copper whistle carved with many mysterious patterns. It was the copper whistle used to summon Azek's messenger. This copper whistle zombified Maynard? That's quite plausible. Even if Mr. Azek isn't a descendant of death, he definitely has a certain connection with death. It's logical that the objects that he carries with him would produce such an effect. Klein nodded in thought. He took out a copper penny and did a quick divination about his conclusion. As he was at the scene of the incident holding the relevant objects and had ample information, he quickly got a result. He saw the copper penny fall into his palm, portrait facing up. This means yes. To think that Mr. Azek didn't remind me to be cautious that these things could happen. Well, he's an amnesiac, so it's not uncommon to forget this. Besides, the copper whistle might not have had negative effects when it was on him. There's a high possibility that it was suppressed. I shouldn't take this copper whistle with me when I'm at cemeteries or ancient castles, places that are prone to hauntings. Otherwise, I'll just be finding trouble for myself and crazily court death. Klein silently made a mental note. He then carried the naked Maynard back onto the bed without much effort. Looking at the obvious mark on the corpse left behind by the stroke of the cane, Klein sighed. He covered the corpse with a piece of white cloth and pretended not to notice. I'll leave this problem to the police department to vex over it. Oh, and the 2 charms I used just now can be considered mission-related expenses, so I can get compensated, he thought as he packed up. He then took the portrait and unlocked the door. The door opened with a creak and Klein saw Inspector Tolley, who had been guarding outside, not allowing anyone to come near. What happened just now? Tolley asked in doubt and worry. He could faintly hear the action going on in the room. Klein smiled and deliberately said with a little exaggeration, Member of Parliament Maynard came back to life and tried to give me a passionate hug. Don't joke like that. Tolley looked into the room in exasperation. Why so serious? Klein said, throwing up his hands. Due to an unconfirmed reason, Member of Parliament Maynard became a zombie. Well, the kind of things that would happen in ghost stories. Fortunately, I hadn't left yet, so I used ritualistic magic to purify the desecration, allowing him to return to his eternal slumber. Is this related to his cause of death? Tolley asked, his expression stern. I cannot give you an answer to that. I don't even know what the problem is. You should know that in our field, unexplainable things are a common occurrence, Klein said. He then looked at the portrait in his hand. When I was doing the mediumship ritual, I saw the scene of Maynard's death. He was engaging in some activities that should only be done between a husband and wife with this woman. And at the climax of his joy, he clutched his chest where the heart is. You mean that is the cause of his death? Tolley gave him a nudge and wink look. In theory, yes, but you should wait for the autopsy. Klein handed the portrait over to Inspector Tolley. Tolley had only glanced at it when he exclaimed, Madame Sharon. Klein looked at him lost. Is she very famous? Yeah, judging from her looks and figure she should be famous. He lampooned in his heart. Tolley looked around and introduced her in a somewhat excited manner. Madame Sharon is the prettiest widow in Tingen City. She's the most sought-after lady in social settings. She was the second wife of Baron Coe, but unfortunately became widowed. She is welcomed by many amongst the nouveau riche merchants and aristocrats, someone who can be invited to banquets by both the Conservative Party and the New Party. It's rumored that she and her stepson, the current Baron Coe, are on friendly terms with many nobles and senior civil servants in Backlund. She's a powerful lady. To think that she and Member of Parliament Maynard had such a relationship. Hee. Simply put, she's an exceptional socialite. Klein secretly concluded. He turned around and pointed into the room. The next part is not included in my job description. How you interrogate Madame Sharon is none of my business. Also, I hit Member of Parliament Maynard with a cane before the purification. You'll have to deal with it and think of an explanation. What? The bear-like Tolley jumped in shock and looked at Klein before looking into the room. With agility that wasn't suited to his body, he dashed in. He pulled back the white cloth that covered the corpse and after examining the body carefully, he heaved a breath of relief. It's better than I imagined. It's not that serious a problem. Maybe I should have drawn my revolver and shot Maynard 5 times with demon-hunting bullets. Let's see if you find that serious or not. Klein lampooned inwardly and pointed outside the door. That's all that you need me for, right? No. Tolley shouted. Wait a moment. Klein asked, puzzled. Why? Tolley explained seriously. We have to prevent any accidents from happening. After we talk to Madame Sharon and get her testimony, I'll send you back to Zetland Street. If Maynard can resurrect after being dead for 10 hours, what else couldn't happen? What would I do if you leave? Tolley added in his head. All right. Klein massaged his temple and said, Find a quiet room for me to rest in then. He wasn't feeling his best in every aspect as he had just advanced a day ago. Having just performed multiple ritual ceremonies, used 2 charms and suffered a non-trivial scare. He needed to enter cogitation to eliminate any problems. Klein was now extremely cautious about losing control. Tully covered the dead body with the white cloth again. He obviously relaxed and replied, "No problem." He brought Klein to a guest room that was closer to the sunlit side of the house. He pointed and said, "Inspector Moretti, don't worry. No one will disturb you. I'll be paying Madame Sharon a visit first." Klein nodded slightly and watched him walk away. Then he closed the door and drew the curtains. In the dim and silent bedroom, he slowly walked over to the rocking chair and sat down comfortably. He allowed his body to rock back and forth rhythmically. There were countless spherical phantasmal lights overlapping in his mind. The buzzing sounds in Klein's ears and the throbbing ache in his head slowly vanished bit by bit. When his situation stabilized, he opened his eyes and looked into the darkness. He outlined a bed, cupboard, and other furniture. Then he calmly thought about his earlier attempts. There isn't much feedback from a few exaggerated jokes. Maybe I have yet to control the powers of the clown potion, as there are still remnant negative effects. Of course, I can't eliminate the possibility that such acting has little effect. Personally, I'm not quite willing to play the role of a clown. But since I picked the sequence pathway, I can only bite the bullet and continue. Actually, everyone has to act like a clown at one point or another in their lives. I don't have to be so uncomfortable with the idea. I have to quickly understand a clown's core elements. As various thoughts churned in his mind, Klein suddenly took out a brass halfpence. Mostly out of habit, he divined if Maynard's death was due to supernatural influences. Maybe it's an occupational hazard. Klein shook his head and laughed. His eyes grew dark as he recited repeatedly, "John Maynard's death was due to supernatural influences." Ding. He flipped the coin as he slouched into the rocking chair. He watched its brass luster twinkle as it rotated in the air. The coin fell right into Klein's open palm, revealing the number 1/2 facing up. A negative answer. In other words, there weren't any supernatural influences involved in John Maynard's death. I guess that man died of orgasmic pleasure. The deceased shouldn't be laughed at, so I won't be using an insipid Chinese phrase to mock him. Klein put away his coin and allowed his thoughts to wander before he nearly fell asleep. Knock, knock, knock. Under the slow and rhythmic knocking, Klein tidied his clothing, put on his policeman's peak cap and walked to the door. Just as his right palm touched the knob, a scene appeared in his mind. The bear-like Inspector Tully was standing outside the door and pulling his collar. His expression looked disturbed and helpless. Klein turned the knob and opened the door leisurely. Inspector Tully appeared before him as he pulled at his collar. "Sorry for making you wait so long. We've already found Madame Sharon and obtained her statement. You can return to Zitland Street. I'm really sorry for taking up your precious time." Klein didn't ask the reason for his current emotions, but he smiled and said, "Madame Sharon admitted that she was with Maynard last night?" "Yes. She said that under the influence of alcohol, she and Maynard didn't manage to control themselves. When she found out that he died of a heart attack, she was very afraid, so she fled the room after she tidied herself up. She then hid in her own guest room. We don't have enough reason to raise charges against her right now, so we had to let her go while restricting some of her freedom. We'll have to wait for the autopsy," Inspector Tully explained in detail. Klein leaned his head sideways and smiled. "Who are you explaining this to?" Tully shook his head and forced a bitter smile. "Oh yeah, I don't have to explain it to you. I'm just frustrated by Madame Maynard, and I started blabbering without realizing it." "Maynard's wife is back?" Klein asked in response. "Yes, unfortunately. There was something abnormal about the steam locomotive. It wasn't late." Tully gave an affirmative answer in a joking manner. Klein didn't ask further but checked if he had all his personal belongings, before following Inspector Tully down the stairs. "Why aren't you arresting her? She's a murderer. I want to sue her, and I want to sue all of you for negligence of duty. I'll hire the best lawyer to sue you." Harsh remarks entered Klein's ears and he looked over subconsciously. He saw a voluptuous and fair middle-aged lady staring angrily across her. Despite having two young men holding her arms, she continued yelling at them. A very trendy regal gown in Backlund this year. Having frequently read the magazine Ladies' Aesthetic, the first thought on Klein's mind was something unrelated to the situation. He then saw a few gentlemen protecting a lady behind them. The lady was in a long black dress with fair smooth skin, waterfall-like brown hair and brown eyes. She looked as pitiful as a fawn in the woods. It made people want to protect her involuntarily. Madame Sharon. Klein suddenly thought of the porno she had starred in. He quickly lifted his right hand, covered his mouth and coughed twice. Out of habit, he tapped his left molars twice and observed the people present with spirit vision. There's some sort of problem with Mrs. Maynard's body. The colors of her aura are thinner. From the colors of her emotions, she's definitely feeling anger and hatred, which is consistent with her outward appearance. The color of Madame Sharon's emotions are shaded in blue, which represents rational thinking and calmness. This is totally contrary to her appearance of panic and nervousness. As expected, a socialite ain't no innocent bunny. Her body is very healthy. After examining her, Klein was about to retract his gaze when he suddenly saw Madame Sharon lift her head and steal a glance in his direction. Then she lowered her head again and put on a trembling, trepid look. If I couldn't see your emotion colors directly, I might have been fooled by your act. You should consider working as an actress. Klein lampooned. He didn't stay any longer and left Maynard's house with Inspector Tolley. They took the carriage arranged by the police station and returned to Zetland Street. After taking over the shift from the captain, he continued to stay on duty at Cheney's Gate. He took the opportunity to write a claims application. After an uneventful night, Klein returned upstairs and received the breakfast that he had requested Roseanne to buy for him. I love this pastry, he complimented. He had already passed her the money for breakfast ahead of time. Really? I can try it tomorrow then. Roseanne replied happily. The corner of Klein's lip twitched as he focused on his battle with the milk and pastry. At 25 minutes past 8, he yawned and fought back the urge to fall asleep. He arrived at the nearby shooting club. He had made an appointment with the asylum doctor, Daxter Guderian, a few days back. Bang, bang, bang. In the small shooting range, Klein and Daxter aimed at their own targets and finished their cylinder of bullets. Flick, flick. Daxter flipped and released the empty shells and examined Klein in interest. You're much more confident than before. Of course, I advanced to sequence 8. I now possess actual combat ability. Klein reflected on his own facial expression and body movements in his head and deliberately acted arrogantly. Because I only used about a month's time to master the power of my potion completely. Daxter pouted slightly and said, although that is something to be proud of, there's no need to say it all the time. Hey, as a spectator, you didn't see through my performance. From the looks of it, a clown has the power to suppress a spectator's ability. Klein smiled at his discovery and asked, how's Hood Eugen recently? He's gone insane for real. Daxter paused and continued, I probed him with various methods. He really has gone insane. I'm considering whether to begin medicating him to see if I can treat him. As a Sequence 7 psychiatrist, he actually pretended to be a mental patient. Even though he was giving treatments to other patients, it doesn't align with the core element of the potion's name. That was an incorrect way of using the acting method. It's no wonder that he went insane. Klein thought and said, before he went insane, did you find out who got in contact with him? Besides the doctors, patients, nurses and odd job workers in the asylum, there were no outsiders that had contact with him, Daxter confidently replied. Klein briefly acknowledged that as he said, how about even earlier? Is there anyone that visited him, or did he leave the asylum regularly for a period of time? In order to follow through with his initial promise, Klein never asked anything about Hood Eugen in his first few meetings. Daxter fell into deep thought. It took him some time before he said, besides the members of the psychology alchemists, there weren't any more than 5 people that visited him. One of them came thrice. His name was L. Without Klein asking, he continued, but I heard from Hood Eugen that L was a pseudonym. His real name was Lenevis. Lenevis? That criminal who cheated both money and sex? To think that he had a connection to Hood Eugen from the psychology alchemists. Klein froze for a moment when he heard the name. He immediately thought about the implications the name Lenevis had. He's the cheat that escaped with more than £10,000. Just providing a clue would earn me £10. And if I help in capturing this moving treasury, I'll earn £100. He's a scum that took advantage of the bodies and feelings of innocent women. To think that he knows Hood Eugen and went to visit him 3 times at the mental asylum. Does this mean that he's connected to the Beyonder Circle or that he's a Beyonder himself? Klein suddenly recalled the name of a potion. The Marauder Pathway Sequence 8. Swindler. These Beyonders took pleasure in swindling others. It's very possible. Klein nodded in thought. He controlled his facial expression and body language, feigning nonchalance as he asked, then when was Mr. Lenevis's last visit to Hood Eugen? Early July. I would have to check the registration records of the mental asylum to give you a specific date. Daxter Guderian replied after a few seconds of thought. Lenevis's scam hadn't been exposed back in early July and he hadn't left Tingen. Klein then asked, does Hood Eugen mention this person usually? No. You should understand that a Sequence 7 psychiatrist would never reveal something by accident. Every word they say has been deliberated over thoroughly. It would be impossible to learn their secrets unless they have some other hidden motives. I was only able to get the telepathist formula after Hood Eugen went mad. Oh right, have you determined the authenticity of the formula? Daxter expertly hid his feelings of pride toward his Pathways potion. Klein laughed and replied, it's authentic. When you need to advance, you can use that to concoct your potion without worry. We can help if the psychology alchemists are unable to provide you with the ingredients. Also, how have you been lately? Not too bad. Other than being a little worried about Hood Eugen's condition, I feel rather relaxed. I no longer have symptoms of a split personality. You've helped me greatly in this regard, Daxter Guderian said, full of emotion. Klein wore a humble expression. It's only right. Let's return to the topic at hand. Since you said that a psychiatrist would deliberate over their every word before uttering it and wouldn't easily reveal their secrets, why did Hood Eugen tell you that Al is Lenevis? Was he hinting at something or was trying to warn you of anything? Daxter froze for a moment, then creased his brows. This is really weird to think that I didn't notice this. Other than that, Hood Eugen didn't mention anything else. Could his motive be for me to tell the upper echelons of the association about the name Lenevis should he meet with any problems? The association's reaction seemed strange too. After I informed them about Hood Eugen's insanity, they did send a liaison. But after I described every detail including Lenevis's name, there were no more replies from the upper echelons. It was like being a stone cast in the ocean. Could this mean that they figured something out? A reasonable deduction. Klein took out his demon-hunting bullets and stuffed them into his revolver, then took aim at the target. If we follow this deduction, Hood Eugen might have long anticipated that he would become insane or die. And this has an untenable connection with Lenevis? But since he already anticipated it, why didn't he ask for help from the upper echelons? Daxter gazed blankly ahead. He thought hard as he said, unfortunately he's insane now. There's no way to effectively communicate with him now. Perhaps some kind of temptation made him choose to take the risk. Klein made a guess. At the same time, he felt that it was regrettable that Hood Eugen had really become a mental patient. This compromised much of the information that he might have otherwise gotten. Even a dead person is better than a lunatic. I can use mediumship rituals to make the dead talk, but what can I do with a lunatic? Oh right, Madame Daly once tried to use mediumship rituals to call upon my lost memories. The theory behind the mediumship rituals seems to have been derived from the psychology alchemists. This means that I can also use the mediumship rituals on the living and create a scenario where I interact with his spirit directly using my spirit. I wonder if Hood Eugen would still be insane under those conditions. Unfortunately, I'm not advanced enough in this field, so I don't think I would be able to do it. I'll call upon the messenger and ask Madame Daly about it first. I'll see if she can provide me with any techniques. If she thinks that only she can accomplish it, then I'll tell the captain and get him to send a telegraph to Backlund to request for assistance. I'm definitely not taking this troublesome course of action just because I want to learn the technique and attempt the ritual to summon the messenger. Many thoughts ran through Klein's mind before he gradually narrowed it down to a single line of thought that could solve the problem. Daxter Guderian approved of his guess. Greed always makes one foolish. Even when a person knows that there's only the abyss in front of him, he'll still attempt to walk to the edge and take a peek. This is called crazily testing the limits of fate. Klein lampooned. Try your best to treat Hood Eugen after returning to the mental asylum. Try to keep him sober for a period of time and get some clues out of him. Also, don't hide your worries and anxiety. Establish more connections with the psychology alchemists and put pressure on them to solve Hood Eugen's problem. That's the most normal and reasonable reaction. Daxter nodded seriously. I'll try my best. Klein didn't say any more, and after some deliberation he asked, has there been any abnormalities with Hood Eugen's body recently? For example, thin scales growing on some parts of his body. Near insanity, true insanity, and losing control were all descriptions of varying levels for a beyonder when something was wrong with them. The least severe of the conditions were when their attitude changed as if they had become a new person, but were still capable of rational thoughts and actions. That was near insanity. Insanity was more severe in that the person would lose all logic, becoming a maniac, and was difficult to communicate with. Those that couldn't be saved were those whose body and mind had become monsters, completely losing control. Sometimes, if the problem wasn't dealt with promptly, insanity would lead to losing control. Before this, to avoid exposing the informant within the psychology alchemists, Dunn instructed the Nighthawks not to immediately deal with Hood Eugen. Instead, they switched to surveillance to ensure that Hood Eugen didn't lose control. But if there were signs of him losing control, they would have to deal with him immediately. Daxter shook his head and let out a bitter laugh. No, you can ease your concern. I'm also very afraid that Hood Eugen will lose control, so I'm paying very close attention to detail. After all, I'm at the mental asylum 6 times a week. After exchanging a few more words, they left the shooting range 10 minutes apart. Klein fought back his intense desire to sleep and took a public carriage back to Daffodil Street. He opened the door and saw his sister sitting on the sofa. She was neither reading nor was she fiddling with machinery parts. She was just staring blankly ahead as if she had lost her soul. Tapping his molars gently, Klein activated his spirit vision and asked, puzzled, Melissa, did something happen? She looks healthy based on the colors of her aura, not malnourished like she was before. Melissa retracted her gaze and pursed her lips, then looked at the kitchen, which was producing some noise. Bella has been recommending the way that her family prepares breakfast back at home. She said that it's very delicious. I agreed to let her try it out this morning. What method is that? Klein had an ominous feeling. Cooking all of the leftovers in a pot, then adding water and bread. Melissa repeated softly. This is the standard recipe for food of unknown origins. Klein pinched his forehead. And so, we shouldn't waste food. Melissa bit her lips and nodded. Sis, I feel like you are questioning life. Klein cleared his throat and suppressed his desire to laugh. He then asked, where's Benson? In the bathroom. Melissa broke free of her daze as her eyes regained their luster. At that moment he heard the sounds of flushing from the bathroom. Benson came out with a newspaper in hand. My dear Klein, shall we get you a portion of breakfast? No, I've already eaten. Klein shook his head resolutely, feeling lucky that he arranged to meet Daxter in the morning. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten Rosen to buy breakfast for him. How regrettable. Otherwise, you would change your views on my culinary skills and be filled with confidence about it. Benson let out a self-deprecating laugh. At this moment, Melissa noticed something. She turned to look at Klein and said, "You're back rather late today. Just be more innocent and lively. Don't worry about me all the time. The state you were in just now was great." Klein immediately smiled. "I have good news. You passed the examination of the police department and can obtain an increased salary?" Melissa asked without thinking. Benson also smiled and nodded. Klein grabbed his hat and stood at the edge of the living room. He said in amusement, "How am I supposed to surprise you guys like that?" After that he added with a dry cough, "Yes, my salary has increased several-fold." He hit his recent increment of 4 additional pounds a week. He intended to save up a small piggy bank for himself. After all, he couldn't just rely on the money in the unmarked account. Furthermore, mentioning that his salary had increased several-fold was enough to scare his siblings. 6 pounds. Melissa exclaimed in shock, finding it bizarre. "I really need to change my job." Benson stroked his hairline. With the information Klein provided him, he had been putting a lot of effort into his studies. Without waiting for Klein to speak, Melissa said with a delighted expression, "In that case, after deducting our normal expenses, you'll be able to save up enough money in 2 or 3 years to meet the standards of a marriageable gentleman." "Well, it was Elizabeth who told me about the standards," Klein said at a loss, amused. "That's something to be considered far into the future. Shouldn't we celebrate? I hereby announce that from today on, our staple food shall become white bread. After my workload decreases, we shall go try out delicacies from different restaurants." Melissa glanced at him, and as though she did not hear what Klein had said, she said, "Benson and I are attending Mass at the St. Selena Cathedral. Do you want to come? I am praising the goddess every day." Klein laughed. "I need to catch up on sleep." He slept until 12:30 in the afternoon. After he had lunch with Benson and Melissa, he continued on with his mission of searching all the houses with red chimneys. When it was late at night, he sealed his room with spirituality and prepared to try the ritual for summoning spirit guide Daly's messenger. For Klein, setting up a simple ritual was as easy as breathing. Very soon he was done preparing the ingredients and he lit up the candle that represented himself. Looking at the flickering candlelight on the desk, Klein had an amusing thought for some baffling reason. Would this be considered holding a candlelight vigil in memory of myself? K, what the hell am I thinking? He reined back his thoughts and picked up the black rotten flower powder that belonged to the domain of death and sprinkled it onto the candle. In return, he caught a whiff of a smell that was akin to formaldehyde from his previous life. Immediately after that, he dripped full moon essence oil, a favored item of the Evernight. Amidst a sizzling crackle, his surroundings suddenly became quiet, and there was a shapeless, magical surge. Klein took a step back and softly recited an ancient Hermes, "I." Then he changed into Hermes, "I summon in my name." The spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the higher dimensional creature that a human orders, the messenger that belongs to Daily Simone. Whoosh! The wind wailed and the dim candlelight was tainted with a blue luster. Under its illumination, the wall behind the desk produced translucent ripples, and a creepy face surfaced. Other than its mouth, it had no eyebrows, eyes, or nose. Its thick lips parted and a long red tongue was extended. There were sharp, irregular teeth that lined its mouth. In addition, the tip of the tongue had 5 delicate fingers. They were constantly extending and retracting as though they were waiting for a delivery. This is Daly's messenger? Compared to Mr. Azek's, it's just like a child. No, I can't accurately determine their differences. Yes, one is an adult giant and the other is a human baby. I wonder if it's due to the magical item, or if it signifies Mr. Azek's strength. I have to reevaluate my understanding of him. Perhaps he's a high-sequence beyonder. Crap, I forgot. In the letter, I should have asked Madame Daly for the names of the Sequence 4 and Sequence 3 corpse collector pathway. Mr. Azek most likely belongs to that pathway. Of course, he might have not advanced via potions. Yes, perhaps it's a gene that's passed down from his ancestors. I'll ask next time the messenger is waiting. Klein looked at it seriously for a while and passed the neatly folded paper into the messenger's hand. Then he watched as the hand gripped it tightly. Whoosh! The messenger retracted its tongue and swallowed the letter. The translucent, creepy and wriggling face shrank back into the wall and disappeared. I got to say, this magic is quite cool. Rather convenient too, but it can't be spread. Klein looked at the candlelight that had returned to normal. He shook his head and ended the ritual. Monday morning. Backlund, Empress Borough. In a hidden corner of the municipal garden built by Duke Negan, Xiao Dericha with her unkempt blonde hair and furs wall with her languid bearing were gawking at the liaison before them in a daze. They were momentarily at a loss at which language to use for a greeting. The petite Xiao, who was slightly over 1.5 meters tall, looked at the golden retriever that had extended its tongue and was wagging its tail. She smoothed out her trainee night attire and weighed her words before she said, "Are you Miss Audrey's messenger?" "Oh my goddess, why am I asking a dog so seriously?" Furs was holding a thin cigarette with her fingers as she chuckled. "Maybe it's a magical creature?" "I've never seen a magical creature that looks so much like a dog," Xiao replied in all seriousness. Susie sat down and closed her mouth. She then pointed at her belly with her paw. There was a leather pouch tied around the dog's body amidst her long golden fur. Xiao looked to her left and right, making sure that there was no one watching before she quickly moved closer. She bent down and removed the pouch. Furs watched curiously when her expression suddenly turned weird. "It's made of crocodile skin and it looks like the work of the fashion designer Mr. Sada's. She's actually using such a pouch for the transaction. In other words, it's very expensive." Xiao raised the leather pouch. Furs pursed her lips tightly and nodded seriously. Xiao instantly lowered her speed in an exaggerated manner. She carefully opened the zipper and took out the letter inside, as though she was carrying an antique vase in her hands. After she read it, she passed the letter to Furs. Furs burned it with her cigarette after reading it carefully. She watched as it turned into ashes and scattered onto the soil. "There's no extra information provided." Xiao pouted subconsciously. She took out a neatly folded paper from the pocket of her trainee night attire. She looked at Susie in an imposing manner and exhorted subconsciously, "This is the investigation report for the past few days. You must pass this on to Miss Audrey Hall directly." Susie quivered and sat up straight, her tail was wagging vigorously. Xiao nodded in satisfaction, stuffed the stack of papers into the leather pouch and tied it around Susie again. Susie howled and ran off very quickly. In the Hall family's luxurious villa, Audrey was sitting on the sofa of her own living room. She was holding a letter opener and was trying to open the letter before her. It was a letter sent by one of her brothers from the Balam Empire in the southern continent. There was a parcel that came along with the letter. At that moment she saw Susie push open the half-closed door. The dog dashed over quickly. Susie sat on the carpet before Audrey and pawed at the leather pouch. "You really are an excellent messenger." Audrey wasn't stingy with her compliments. Susie looked back at the door. It induced vibrations in the air and said softly, "Your friend is very serious. When I saw her, she reminded me of the time when a hunter came to train us. She had been a complimentary gift when Count Hall bought hunting dogs." "Susie, your loan is getting more and more fluent. There are just a few problems with your logic in using the language." Audrey watched as her golden retriever took off the pouch on her own and skillfully pulled open the zipper. She gave Susie a look and immediately understood. She stood up and ran to lock the door. "There's no results so far, but we found that some vagrants disappeared around the Backlund Bridge borough. Though we can't know for sure that it was Kalangos. Perhaps the vagrants merely changed their movement patterns suddenly. Audrey flipped through the investigation report and seriously wondered how she should reply to Zio and Furs. I'll tell Zio that as long as she can track down Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos, I'll buy the Sheriff Potion formula for her. No, that's not friendly enough. It would make her feel an inferiority complex. Yes, I shall say, Zio, I've prepared your reward. As long as you can complete the task, 450 pounds will be yours. Sigh, as far as the main ingredients for the telepathist formula, I've only found the Farsman rabbit's spinal fluid. I still need the rainbow salamander's pituitary gland. Glaint, Zio, and Furs have yet to find it. Audrey, cheer up. At least you've digested the spectator potion completely. Once you put together all the ingredients, you'll become a Sequence 8 Beyonder. Audrey reined in her thoughts, picked up a pen and paper and quickly wrote a reply. She stuffed it back into the leather pouch and entrusted Susie to make another trip. She watched her golden retriever as she opened the letter that her brother had sent. She read it with a smile. My dear sister, I think you should come to the southern continent too. Come over to the colonized regions of the Balam Empire. There's abundant sunlight, fresh air, a clean environment, freshly caught seafood, various unique cultures, and the very kind and obedient Balam people who make good servants, as well as the smell of freedom. On the contrary, Backland is cold and moist, the air is bad, there's always dust and it's always gloomy. Plus, it's highly populated, which leads to all sorts of problems. And the endless balls, banquets and salons. The social events are so boring and insipid that I wouldn't want to stay for a minute. Dear sister, I believe you share the same feeling. I'm not running away from home. I'm merely seeking my own place in life, but our brother definitely doesn't think so. He's always been a selfish person. Of course, he wouldn't be stingy with you because you can only claim a tiny part of the family wealth, while I would be his biggest competition in the fight for the inheritance within the ranks of nobles. After all, our father is a duke who takes a long view. He definitely wouldn't be restrained by the rule that the eldest sibling will inherit the rank of nobility. As long as he feels that it's necessary, he would do anything. Just like when he sold off half the farmland and pastures to enter the banking industry, regardless of the strong opposition. I miss Backland sometimes, mostly father, mother, and you. I miss the smile that you put on my face during those few years. You must have become the most dazzling gem in Backland, but unfortunately, I'll only be able to return after 2 years. A career is a man's pride, while the outstanding young people in the Lone Kingdom treat the world as their stage. You can tell our dear aunt that the coastal regions in the Balam Empire are very suitable for vacations, and especially suitable for her, given how her joints ache and swell in the winter. I sincerely invite her to be my guest. If you can come with her, that would be even better. I didn't send you too many gifts. They're mainly things that are rich with the traditions and styles of Balam, such as the unique yellow silk, and the ornaments that are filled with traits related to the worship of death. I remembered that you love things regarding mysticism, so I'll look around for you. The culture here is full of mystery. After reading the letter, Audrey picked up a pen, paper, and writing board. She leaned back into the sofa, pursed her lips, and wrote seriously, My dearest Alfred, although it has been less than a year, the little girl in your memories has grown up. I don't like mysticism anymore, so you don't have to search for those kinds of things. Because it's very dangerous. Audrey puffed up her cheeks and added in her head. She had heard of too many tragedies related to mysterious objects when participating in Beyonder gatherings and from stories Zio and Furs recounted. She thought and declared excitedly, I'm now interested in biology. Recently I've been in awe of the rainbow salamander. Can you ask around for me and find out where I can find one of these creatures, or if they have a complete corpse that has been preserved?